first of all, I would like to introduce the first panel in Tiffany. So if we could give a round of applause to them, that'd be fantastic.
So I'm just going to introduce myself really quickly, if you weren't already here at the first event. My name is Tiffany Obobu. I'm the current president of the Afro-Caribbean Society in the medical school. So I luckily was able to present the first middle ground as well. So welcome back to anyone who went to that one, to part 2, and welcome to anyone who's just here for this one. So as Phoebe said, if everyone could log into Menti, this isn't just for the panel to discuss, but we're having a really nice open conversation. We want hundreds of things on the board so everyone can talk. I'll keep it brief so that we can have more entertaining conversations, if not just me talking. So if the rest of the panel want to come up and introduce themselves as well. Panel 1.
I'm Denzel. I'm a second-year law student, and yeah, I'm part of the panel.
Hi, I'm Abby. I'm a first-year PhD student in education.
Hi, I'm Constantino. I'm a lecturer in the education department.
Hi, I'm Sharif. I'm a first-year education student.
Hello, my name is Zach Clifton, and I'm the former president of the 93% Club, and I'm about to graduate from York Law School.
Hi, I'm Fun. I'm a second-year social and political sciences student.
Hi, I'm Jill. I'm Associate Dean for Learning, Teaching and Students for the Faculty of Social Sciences.
Hi, I'm Lene. I'm a third-year physics and astrophysics student, also about to graduate. Thank goodness.
And we've already met. We've got our mentee on the board. So I'll start off with the first question. Do you believe that there is an equal opportunity in accessing education in the UK? Okay, so if you think there's an unequal opportunity, that's agree. If you think there's an equal opportunity, that's disagree. We'll roll with it. We'll roll with it. It's fine. So I'll first of all open it to the panel. But looking at the audience, it seems that most people are on the either strongly agree or agree side. So most of us are agreeing with the statement. But what do our panel have to say? Does anyone want to start us off?
I'll start. So I have a single parent, and I have been lucky enough to go to grammar school because I'm from somewhere that has a lot of grammar schools. And my younger sister also got a 100% scholarship to a private school. But without the power of our mother, I don't think that we would have had a fair chance in education. Because of where I come from, I feel like the fact that I've got into grammar school, the fact that there is grammar schools in and of itself just shows that there isn't a very equal chance to have the best education possible, because I went to a school that kind of pushed us into, oh, you will do this, you will do A-levels, you will get into university or else, basically. And the fact that not everybody gets that same opportunity with the same types of teachers is completely unfair. And I think this actually made me want to go into education as well, because I feel like everyone should get an equal chance at the best possible education. Anyone else?
Just to add to that the facts, in my view, speak for themselves. The stats speak for themselves in terms of, the statistics that our speaker gave about the proportion of state school pupils at university. And the proportion of private school pupils at university. So, in 9 of the Russell Group institutions, over 25% of those students are from private school backgrounds, and only 7% of students went to private school. So, for me, the facts speak for themselves, really.
Yeah, no, I would add to that. I think you touched on something that was really important. And if we go to our Mentimeter, putting it into context, everyone who strongly agreed, we're talking about opportunities, discrimination, the fact that people who are going to private school are more likely to have these better connections and things like that. I relate to your story quite a lot because I was also from a lower socioeconomic background, and I went to a private school through 100% bursary. So if I didn't get that, I wouldn't have gone to that private school. And I've made so many networks and connections, which I'm so grateful for, purely because of private school. And I know that I shouldn't have gone in a way because I couldn't afford it. I wasn't paying the money that everyone else was. So yeah, I completely agree. in what you were saying and the fact that you think that there is this disparity. There's a reason why private schools exist. There's a reason why people pay. You're not going to pay if it's not going to better your opportunity or better your access to something. And that in itself shows that there is a pretty big disparity.
So I suppose I would start with the point about, university education, so that further education aspect. What we found with 93% Club is that because of education funding for secondary schools being politicised, i.e. it gets cut every few years when the economy goes up and down, we found that produces two barriers for state-educated students getting into universities. Because, we all know you have to go through that process of doing an interview, writing a personal statement, etc. That assumes that you have a degree of soft skills. And because of, again, spending being politicised, that results in students having less soft skills because, for one, a lot of kind of niche humanities such as law and Latin tend to get cut out of state schools. And young people can gain a lot of valuable soft skills from studying those courses. And so they're lacking those when they start to apply for university. And the other aspect of that, which you've touched on, which is networking, we find that because state schools receive less funding, employers see them as less of a target for their apprenticeships and graduate schemes, etc. And ultimately that results in employers doing less outreach work within state-educated high schools. So again, we find that state-educated students tend to have narrower horizons in what career is feasible and relatable for them to go into. So to go back to the question, I don't think it's equal at all. And going back to that point of soft skills, and if you want me to kind of make a point about how we can actually solve the problem as well, I think one thing the university can do is really run a proper employment programme that's tailored towards state-educated students. And in particular, the best thing that they can do is simply just give someone a mentor.
You can keep that.
Well, I think that I'm going to second what everybody's said, second, third, whatever, and particularly what Jill was mentioning. One of the important things to look at is, before even talking about the jobs and the careers, is going back to POLAR, participation of local area data and free school meals. And the reality is, if you are from working class and you're coming from these poorer areas, your chances are practically nil, particularly for getting into the illustrious 24, the Russell Group, that York is part of. That's something that needs to be improved. And when you talk about the mentorships and all those things need to be starting, well before year 10 and 11. It's too late then. We need to go back way before that. But more importantly, when you look at these things, we need to be looking at them from this whole thing is about intersections. We need to be looking about them in terms of looking at other characteristics as well as class. We need to be looking at race. We need to be looking at gender. We've always talked about gender, or we have for the last 20-odd years or so, but we need to be looking at those things combined because they add different levels of disadvantage in trying to get to have an even and fair playing field so you can even get into one of the illustrious institutions.
I think Denzel wants to add something.
And to kind of build off of that point, I saw someone put meritocracy as a fallacy, and that's something that I heavily believe because obviously being from London and like being from a lower socioeconomic background, it's one of those things that going into higher education, there's loads of grammar schools near where I live. So it's one of those things where it's like, one of the ways that you can get into a grammar school or a better school is if you live near the area. So they judge kind of based on your postcode. Some of the things is like if you're able to travel there within like under an hour or something like that, you like get a higher chance of getting into a school because obviously you're right next to it. So me, obviously being from a lower socioeconomic background, most of the good schools were further away from me. So I feel like I was at a disadvantage to loads of other students who lived so much closer to the schools because I was judged purely based on my intelligence. So I had to do these entrance exams to get into school and everything else. But there were students who I probably, if they did the entrance exams in the same way that I did, I would have definitely been better than or had a better chance of getting in over them. I didn't have that same access to that opportunity simply because of where I lived. So it's kind of, when we look at things like that and we look at on a grand scheme of things in terms of meritocracy, we can't really say that we do judge people based on their intelligence and based on their skill and based on how suited they are to certain jobs and certain positions, because as we see in this situation with access to education, that just isn't the case. If it was a skills-based thing where you got in based on your intelligence or based on like certain attributes that you hold, I probably would be in a school that I probably would have been in a better school than I went to. I'm happy that I went to the school that I did, but obviously because of where I lived, I didn't get to have that same access to the opportunities that other people did.
Yeah.
Just to offer like a different perspective, I went to a private school as well, like paid for it, but I can't. Is this on?
Just
Play a
hold
bit
it closer.
Oh, I can't say though that honestly that it particularly benefited me, because I came out of that school with like rubbish A-level grades because I was judged for maybe some of the characteristics that you might have mentioned, and I came to York to clearing, and that was purely just based on, you know, my grades, which weren't great, and I can't say that my experience of being in a private school is what got me here. Obviously by default, I mean, going to a private school has its benefits, but from my personal experience, and I know for a lot of the people that went to my school, apart from the people that were kind of Oxbridge applicants, none of them felt that their kind of private school education was of an amazing benefit. And for a lot of us, we saw our friends that went to state schools actually ended up going to better unis, for whatever reason that might be, I'm not sure, but yeah, just to offer another perspective.
Yeah, and I think going off of that, we could also think about the idea, who's to blame? Like, can we blame people if they have money? Like we talk about the fact that it's unequal and obviously you have to pay for private school, but if someone, we also need to, like, on the flip side of it, think about the fact that is it their fault if they have money? So I'm currently studying medicine. One of the reasons I'm doing that is because hopefully I'll have a bit of money at the end of my degree and all that stuff. So if I then decide to use this money to, you know, get my child a tutor or something like that, is this something that we can put too much blame towards? So I think that's also another aspect we need to think about.
I don't think it's private schools' fault that they're able to access better opportunities than state schools. I think it's a problem within the state school system that a lot of the time you see the quality of education is not as good as you would be able to get in a private school, which is why people choose to send their kids to private school in the first place. So I think we often talk about, you know, private schools in and of themselves as kind of quote unquote the villains in this situation, but we don't actually speak about the fact that there are so many problems within the infrastructure of the state school system that need to be addressed before to also bring state schools up to the same level as private schools.
I think that's a really interesting point, because that's the main reason why my mum sent me, or why I sat the entrance exams, because my area wasn't the best. So the school wasn't really a school. It's kind of where people around the age of 14 just kind of congregated until about 12 p.m. So my mum wanted me to get GCSEs, whereas most people left. I think the statistic from the school near my house is 50% of students left with a C. So there's a reason why I applied for a school which took me an hour to travel to, because I want more than one GCSE at a C level. So I think that's also something you've got to consider.
Just to touch on what you said, like, I agree with you completely. You know, sometimes I feel that in this debate about education, you know, state versus private, the word versus shouldn't really be there. You know, I feel like there is this assumption that the kind of state-educated side is about removing opportunities for private school students. And being on the state school side, I think that's the wrong approach. You know, sometimes people ask me, you know, do you think we should get rid of private schools? And I'll say, I don't have an answer, you know, and I don't think it's a relevant issue. And I think a good way to summarise it, which I think is, you know, we'll agree on, would be it's not about, you know, lowering the ceiling, it's about widening the walls. So rather than removing opportunities and putting us all on a lower footing, it's about just creating more resources that everyone can share in. Quite an abstract way of putting it, but it's a nice sort of metaphor.
Yeah, no, I really like that. And
I think that depends on where you live, because it varies in Scotland and it varies in Wales. You do not have grammar schools in Wales, and they have felt that as a result of them, they've been able to bring up some of the bottom as a result of that. It has unfortunately affected the top some, but that's their way of approaching it, and Scotland has a completely different system too. So there are other ways of looking at it too. I'm not suggesting that private schools, et cetera, are negative. I went to one, and I have a similar story to yours in that respect. But my point being that there are other ways of looking at the picture, particularly when admissions at a school like this in England is going to have people from Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland as well coming.
Yeah, I want to agree on that. So my partner's actually Welsh, and we've actually had this discussion in and of itself. So like when we first got together, and I was talking about how I went to a grammar school, and then he was like, "Ew, abolish grammar schools," and I was like, "No, I love my grammar school, no." But it is an important thing, because the fact that we basically both got the same grades, and I had had to do this 11 plus to deal with all the pressure from grammar school, and then I ended up getting exactly the same grades as him. It just shows that if the funding is split between all schools, then everyone can do better. We don't need to worry about the people at the top, because they're going to be fine either way. We need to worry about the people at the bottom, and that's what the disparity is. That's where the problem lies. It's the money as well. Again, I'm going into teaching, and when I first was going into teaching, I was like, I'm only going to teach at a private school because I really want lots of money. But having research things and looking at education issues and reflecting on my own time in the education sector and my sister's time and now my partner's time, it's I would rather take an L, get a bit less money, but be able to introduce physics, unfortunately, to a whole new ground of people and be able to give them the opportunities that they wouldn't get otherwise, because they wouldn't have the same level of teaching that I would be able to provide.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think we've kind of touched on the first aspects of the next question, to be honest.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Obviously, you got into a private school through 100% bursary. Could you argue that that's a method of access for people who are from a lower socioeconomic background?
Yeah, 100%. I definitely think that is a method of access. I think the issue lies in the fact that, obviously it's a lot of money to go to private school, and they've not got that much money spare £10,000 to send many kids to it. So I think there are about 3 spaces for bursary students. So I completely agree. It's great for access, but it's only allowing access for 3 people, which is 3 more than 0. But it's still not going to minimise that disparity as much as one would like. But it's definitely a move in the right direction, and I'm so grateful for it. So, yeah. 100%.
I would actually disagree, though, because the amount of tutoring that people have to get into the school. I've always been lucky because I've been more of an academic person, because I've always loved learning. But my sister, not the same as me, and she had to go through quite a lot of the training for her to be able to pass that exam, to be able to get that bursary, and that came on hardship of me and my mum having to provide this for her, because we didn't want her to be disadvantaged in a way. So while it's on paper it seems like a great way, it's oh look, you're opening the doors to all these people, you're not really opening all the doors. It's you've opened the door, but you've put a glass panel there, and you have to smash through that glass panel. So it's a step in the right direction, yes, but it's still not being done in the right way.
Yeah, so what you're talking about with your sister, the fact that it's allowing access, but you're still having these glass doors put up. The next question should come up eventually. At what point is your upbringing no longer an excuse? At what point does it become your own personal problem and your own personal responsibility? And particularly when this comes to things that are going to affect you in terms of class, race, intersectionality, things like that. So, yeah. Okay, so that question has caused a lot of hubbub. If we could quiet it down a little bit. Yeah? A bit quieter. Thank you very much. So the question again, is there a point in which your upbringing is no longer an excuse? So we can think about this in terms of how you treat people from other classes, or your access to education, like the previous question, or in terms of how you view people? Is there a point where you can no longer use your background as an excuse for your behaviour? What do we think, our panel?
I don't mind going first. This is a really difficult one, and my answer isn't going to be very clear, but for those of you who were here at the last Middle Ground panel, I made a point, which was, a few people can remember this. Thatcher, okay. Yeah, so I suppose just an anecdote about me. So I come from like a really white, working class, rural background. I think the demographics are actually, it's 99% of people who live there are white. It's very socially conservative. And to be honest, when I was growing up, there was a lot of racism, you know, and it wouldn't be uncommon for you to hear the sort of nice guy down the street suddenly saying lots of kind of horrible racial slurs about, you know, the Asian family who's moved in down the street, you know. And really, even though my family were very liberal, and, you know, they rose me to say, you know, this stuff is wrong, and I grew up with this belief, obviously saying racism is a bad thing, and I shouldn't be passive about it. You know, having grown up in that environment where there was such intolerance and also so little diversity, you know, it wasn't until I actually went to college in Preston, you know, it's an area which is majority Asian, Muslim, so very diverse, something I was very new to. I started to realise that I actually had my own unconscious biases towards people from those groups. And so, I mean, how I can frame this to answer the question is, at what point is your upbringing, you know, not an excuse? To be honest, I don't think it's ever an excuse, you know, because I think we're all really capable of becoming conscious of our background and where we're from. And really, I think, I mean, I'd be interested to hear people's opinions on this, but sometimes I feel, white people especially, is that we tend to actually make an active choice in our minds to ignore certain issues because they don't affect us. And I was definitely like this, you know, because I've come from like a really privileged background and I had these beliefs, and because the issue never affected me, you know, I never challenged those beliefs. But really, if there's any lessons to kind of go from it, it's like young people need to be exposed to diversity when they're young, you know. And again, you can make all these statements about, you know, racism being an awful thing on social media, but I think if as a white person you don't actually sit down and properly meditate on how has my background affected how I view people from other cultures, then really you're just part of the problem. But I'm not sure how that answers the question. But to be honest, I don't think you have an excuse at any point, to be honest, because, again, we're all capable of becoming conscious of our background.
It's like a resistance to change. That's what some people have. Yeah. Like, I had a flatmate in first year who basically had never met a black person. He had met a black person, but he hadn't really met a black person, shown by the fact that I came to uni, purple extensions, took them out, had my natural hair out. He was like, "You couldn't dye your hair? Wow." And I was like, "No, these are extensions." And he was like, "Oh, well, I know everything about this, and I know everything about that, and blah, 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 blah." And he had this hesitancy to change because he thought that he did know everything, and he thought that he was being, like, kind and diverse, but he wasn't, because he hadn't had those experiences. And the thing with him is it took a little while, but he did end up, like, being open to change. And it's not, like, because he didn't want to, it's because he was programmed in a way where he thought he was, like, not resistant to change, but he kind of was.
Do you want to pass the mic?
And like to kind of jump in on that point as well. Obviously, in my secondary school, I went to a predominantly white secondary school. So it's one of those things where once you're one of the only black people in like a predominantly white school, you hear a couple comments, you hear a couple people saying stuff. So one of my close friends was like, he comes from a really conservative family, vote Tory every year. They'd probably vote nationalist if they could. But like, he kind of, like, some of his political beliefs and stuff were ingrained because of his family experiences. So there'd be like times where me and him are having conversations. We barely had political conversations because of this, and I was aware of this, and I thought, I can't really change your mind because of the background that you come from. So I'll just avoid the conversation, which is probably the worst approach to go with, because you can't really... You can accept a person without their political beliefs, but if someone's political beliefs are part of who they are. So if somebody is rejecting an issue that's related to you, then they reject that part of you. So yeah, it'd kind of be one of those comments where it's like the typical comments where it's like the Afro hair jokes, like, "Oh, I could put a pen in your hair and it'll stay there," or like the like reinforcing stereotypes and stuff. It were just common things like microaggressions that will come out in his behavior and stuff. And it's one of those things where it's like, again, as you were saying, it's like everyone has that ability to like educate themselves on certain issues. Like I myself, there's been times where it's like, obviously being from an environment where I was, like where I lived, it's a thing where loads of people are really homophobic. So it's like, obviously, going to a boys' school as well, like there's so much homophobia because most of the people are closeted. So they want to kind of reject that aspect of themselves. But it's a thing where it's like homophobia was so common in school as well and in where I lived. So it's like I had no excuse when I started using social media and stuff like that and exposing myself to more people who were part of the LGBTQ, where it's like I can't be ignorant to this and I can't be homophobic in the way that I was or the way that we all were because now I have access to other individuals who are going through this and stuff like that. So it's kind of like, as you were saying, everyone has access to this information, everyone has access to the ability to be kind of, I'm trying to find an academic way of saying clued up, but be kind of, I don't know, have like that knowledge that of different people and different experiences. So in that aspect, I think there is a certain point where you have to kind of be like, yes, your experiences influence you to a certain extent, but you as an individual have that power to go off and like actually educate yourself or challenge your own experiences. Because I think that's one thing that people don't do, is challenging our own personal ideas, our own experiences, our own like backgrounds and stuff. So, and that's how you strengthen your views, that's how you change them. So I think that's one thing that, I think when you become a mature individual, there has to be that point of challenging yourself.
Can I just add to that? For me, I absolutely agree with that. I kind of feel that change, I kind of have to remember that change for me is a journey, not a destination. And so in terms of how I'm affected by my background, then, you know, I'm going to mess up. I might say stupid things. And it's just that raising of consciousness all the time and that willingness to change that's important. And I don't necessarily think there's like I don't think I'll ever get to this point where I'm a perfect human being. Do you know what I mean?
I think this is like you can keep up. I think this is a whole different conversation, but I completely agree with you. So this is something I'm really passionate about, hence why I'm presenting tonight. So when I have these conversations with my friends, especially my friends who are white, I always tell them, if you mess up, I'm not going to cancel you. Like that, I think the whole idea of like cancel culture and that idea, like if someone's trying to educate themselves, they're going to mess up. That's what learning is. You make a mistake, you correct yourself. But if they're too scared to make a mistake and get cancelled and their future career goes down the drain, they're never going to want to learn, because part of learning is making mistakes. So I really think, as you said, it's this idea of a journey, knowing that you're not going to be this perfect being, but being here today, being part of this conversation, hearing people, hearing all these different viewpoints, being willing to put your things on the board or be on this panel is the start, and like no one should be ever scared to have this conversation. That's my little TED talk for the day.
I don't think upbringing can be an excuse at all. I'm from a country named China, if you're curious. I'm mating there. And we are a country with no race, like everybody's the same. Not the way, you gotta think, so I don't really have the idea of racism before I come here, because I rarely see like people from different skin color, apart from tourists. I feel like what I've been told and how I teach myself is you just keep being open-minded. So it's not really matter, like you don't really judge people on their skin color or whatever. It's all such an individual thing. If I come to someone who's black, I'm not gonna have the stupid previous idea saying, oh, he definitely played basketball, he definitely know how to rap, or like that kind of thing. Or if it's a white fella, probably, oh, he can't season food. You just, it's like one of those things. You just be 100% blank and try to embrace everything. Yeah, that's pretty much.
I just want to challenge a little bit of what you said. As the program leader for a master's in social justice and education here, where about 60% of my students are from China, you have 56 or 57 different nationalities, Han being the major ones, and you do have ethnic issues between rural and urban, and there are differences in pigmentation. And when we look at class and we look at race, that is an issue in China too. It's not just in the UK.
Okay. Right, I just get told, and that could be a worldwide issue. And I'm Han, I'm majority, so.
Most of the Chinese students here are Han. That's why I'm saying that's a class and a race issue again. It's an ethnicity issue.
Oh my God, my face is turning red now.
You have anything you want to add?
I don't really know how to follow that. I think
Neither do I.
I think when I first looked at this question, I saw it more of kind of with regards to educational outcomes. So is there a point when upbringing is no longer an excuse with regards to your educational achievements? And I would just say with regards to that, because obviously the way that education is set up, we start very young. You don't have a choice where you go if you're from a family where your parents aren't really clued up on schools. Like me, I'm from an area where I didn't even know grammar schools existed. The nearest private school was about an hour away. I went to a state school, and my parents did the best that they could. It was very much that you start in your primary school, which is like 10 minutes down the road, and then you default to the secondary school, which is 5 minutes down the road, and you just go along with what everyone else is doing. And I would say with regards to upbringing and educational outcomes, obviously that's going to have an effect on your education from GCSEs to A-levels. I suppose when you get to university, it's a bit more complex because you've got more of a cognitive awareness. You find out that there's grammar schools, you mix with people who are from different backgrounds, who have had different educational experiences to you. So I would say it's quite complex when it gets to that point because you kind of fight in between your upbringing and your agency and being able to do the best that you can with kind of like your limited like knowledge, like I don't want to throw in some terms, but like cultural capital, social capital, those types of things. So yeah, I think it's quite a complex question when it comes to if you're thinking about educational outcomes.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've had a really nice conversation with that. But with that, we'll move on to the next question. So, is there a need for more diversity in the workplace? And with this, I'm going to put a little add-on. Okay, right. So here's a bit of context. So in the UK, let me make sure I got my statistics right. In the UK, 4% of the population are black. Whereas in the workplace, they might have, for example, 7% of their staff as black. And we would define that as having a low diversity rate. Using that context, do you think there is a need for more diversity in the workplace? And if so, why? Because statistically, you wouldn't think so.
Absolutely. If you look at that 7%, how many of them are the senior managers? How many of them are running the company, and how many of them are cleaning and doing everything else?
I think it's a question of like what is the actual purpose of the diversity, because if the roles that are being carried out are being done well, then some might argue, why do you need 50% of them to be black and not? Does that make sense?
I'm not suggesting 50%.
No,
but
I'm not saying.
But I'm saying if you look even at the Stanford model, just for business in general, it's always about diversity and inclusion. And by having more women, more people of color, more people from working class backgrounds, the decisions, the creativity, everything flourishes as a result of it. Things grow. You expand yourself a lot more. There needs to be a lot more of this across all of these protected characteristics. And I know class is not a protected characteristic. I think it should be. But the point being that I think all of those need to be intermixed, intersected when looking at this, so that you bring it up and you have more of a mix, because as a result of that, everybody benefits.
I completely agree with that. I was just wondering, what's your take on like positive discrimination then?
Well, I'm from the States, so you shouldn't ask me that. It's different than it is from here. And I would argue that when we talk about women in the, the Labor Party, that's what we have. That is positive discrimination for the number of women who we want for roles as MPs. But we don't call it that But that's what it is. It was even taken to court. I'm a lawyer also. It was taken to court. It was overturned, and then they put it back in place again, and it's in place for a couple more years. We do it in that case. Why can't we do it in others in the UK?
I want as many qualifications as you. Just rolling them off. I've got like EPQ and that's it.
I think for me personally, I've just recently gone through the kind of internship process for like summer internships, and I, without a doubt, recognise the benefits I have, like being black and a girl, and I live with 6 white boys, and I can't say that they got through that process easily because they are white men. And I think there is definitely a conversation to be had now about the advantages that kind of BAME and kind of social minorities have in terms of accessing these opportunities. Because I know for a fact I probably got through a lot of stages just because I'm black and a girl.
I'm not suggesting it was, because what I did talk about was intersectionality. I'm talking about class, working class as well, regardless of what race/ethnicity they are, and that those things combined apply to how difficult your struggle or your situation is. What was an advantage for you in some way, even though you may not have thought of it that way because you said the C's or whatever in the private school, there was that other hidden curriculum and knowledge that you gained there. I know I gained it, that you may not realize, that probably helped you where some of those other white guys you're living with who might have been from more of a working class didn't have, and they might have struggled more. That's the kind of suggestion. I don't know your exact situation, but that's the argument I'm making, that it's not looking at these things siloed. And I said that the last time I was on the panel. It's looking at the intersections between your working class background, your race, your gender, your disability, looking at all of those things together and how they may I hate that word, but be a challenge to you in terms of how you get to the top. And getting business, education, everybody else to recognize those and recognize them not as disadvantages, but as gifts, as things that are beneficial to making the whole picture better, like Benetton kind of thing.
Does anyone else on the panel or the audience, I can move with the microphone, have anything they want to add to the conversation?
I think with this, there's the problem of tokenism, though, because you do just feel like, oh, I'm here to fill a quota, cool. And it shouldn't be like that. Like, positive discrimination, the problem with that in and of itself is that you will feel like a token. And I haven't really talked about this, but we have this Black Access program that I'm a part of, and I feel like that's part of the reason I've been invited. We're two, my girls. But that part of that program, and one of the base things that we are talking about is making it not tokenism. It's like, this is a program to open all these opportunities to black people that they won't receive from like their schools or colleges, because we've talked about our own experiences. It's not just based on assumptions, it's based on, like, we started off with just talks about what was education like, what's uni like, what's this like, and then we've come out with a program, and it's about making the changes but not making them feel like tokenism. Like, when you fill out a form and it's like, you know, when you get that question, you're like, okay, cool, I'm going to skip like 10 places now because they want to fill in a quota. Like, black, this. Like, it just kind of feels uncomfortable. It doesn't feel like they really care about what I bring to the table, basically.
I think you can kind of take two things from that as well. Like, the idea you've just said about tokenism. I mean, in my high school, Hope was here a minute ago, I saw her face. But hi. When you walk past my high school, my face is on the billboard. I left 3 years ago, and my face is still there. It's the first thing you see when you go down the really long street. Like, I was always picked at all the shoots, all the photo shoots they had. They would literally have a picture of me, and then someone because we had a preparatory department. God, that's so private school. we had a preparatory department, a secondary school, and a sixth form. So they would literally have me, who was black, and a sixth form student. They'd have someone who was white in high school, and then they'd always have someone who's in the preparatory department who was Asian. And they'd have the three of us in a photo like that. So it did feel very token-like. And then I think you also touched on something else, which made me think of the idea of, as I think you said, or I mean, we've all said at a point, when you write down, like, I'm a black female, and things like that. If I get somewhere, you know, I got into medical school, and this is also a similar thing to people who can't relate, but a similar thing to people who are in the class of 2020, and we got told, oh, you're only in university because of COVID. I worked so hard in secondary school. I worked so hard. Like, even though I didn't sit my A-levels, and even though I'm a black female, and to you, you might think I'm only here because I tick boxes. I promise you, I worked so hard to get to where I am. And part of the annoyance with positive discrimination, while it's got these benefits, it's also got those disadvantages, because people are now going to look at me just as a tick box, and they're not going to think I can do what I do, but I'm kind of smart. So, yeah. Is anyone else? Oh.
I was really struck by the point that you made about being a black female going on a graduate recruitment. And I was also struck by the kind of debates. And I think for me, I just wonder if diversity is a bit old, and what we're really talking about is creating an environment of inclusion. So an environment of inclusion that is not about the colour of our skin. Because I was thinking, but why is that wrong then? In a climate and a culture, and particularly, you know, since COVID, what it's highlighted is some of the discrimination that you've been talking about. And so people are trying to work with it. And I'm absolutely on the same page as you. I don't want a job because of the colour of my skin. You know, when the Vice-Chancellor said, would you kind of lead on, you know, particular initiatives on equality and diversity, first thing I said to Charlie, are you asking me because I'm a person of colour? Because I'm the only person of colour on University Executive Board. And he said no. You know, he had done his homework. It's because it's your research area and it's something you care about. So I think it's all right to ask and test those things out. But I think what you said was thoughtful, reflective and challenging. How do we use the current climate so that it actually does work for us when there's been a decade, in exactly the way that you just so beautifully articulated, of those kinds of disadvantages? Because it isn't about one or the other, you know, and that lovely narrative about it's a journey. It doesn't stop when we get there. And what does getting there actually mean? And the story about pictures, you know, I just find that just hugely... Actually, my school was worse than yours because it's closed down now, you know. But how do we change that? Because we end up colluding with those processes, don't we? You know, when I moved from Birmingham University, I just had this, you know, I'm the poster girl of Birmingham. I left 3 years ago and I'm still the bloody poster person. I don't think they've kind of, you know, realised you've gone. So I think we have a job of work to do to not collude with those processes, but not to complain about them. So what would we do? So I'd be really interested to hear, in the context of this university, what do we do with those images? How do we portray them in a way that tells a compelling story, a compelling journey, and the one that says, we're never going to get this right, because the day that we get it right is the day we got it wrong.
Yeah, and on that note, one more speaker.
Yeah, I think a lot of good stuff's been said, but I do wonder if in some way we're missing the mark when we talk about inclusion and CEOs and closer, yeah, and like I don't know, top FTSE 500 companies or that kind of thing, because even if you put a black person, a woman, if you put a gay person in that role, those companies, those organisations, they still oppress people. They still oppress their own workers. So if you put somebody from a marginalised group in a position at the top of those organisations, are we actually changing anything for people who are lower down the food chain?
I think that kind of, well, the last thing, we'll move on. Promise, Phoebe. I think it kind of depends. So, for example, I've had, luckily, throughout my life, I've been able to be in like some of those, like, obviously not that high, I'm a student, but in like those like higher roles. So in high school, like head girl team, and I've been able to work with allowing people to, like the interview process, I was heavily involved in that for medical school and making the questions. And in those things, while I was in these higher roles per se, I was able to screen and make sure that the new cohorts coming in were more aware of these things. So the questions that I was putting forward in these interview things, while I can't discuss them, they were things that kind of made sure people were more culturally competent, and they were going into healthcare, and some of the questions were kind of screening to make sure we'd reduce some of like racial bias that's existing in the NHS, things like that. So I do think that having people from marginalised communities higher up will help, because we always say it's what you bring to the table, but if you've not got that big of a plate, what can you bring? And with that, I think we'll conclude this panel, just so we don't run over time too much. So thank you very much to everyone who was involved, and if you've done it twice. We'll introduce ourselves starting from my left with our newest panel member. So if you want to pass the mic if you need to, or just go around saying your name, what you study, things like that.
Hi everyone, my name's Zarin. I study psychology. I'm a final year. And yeah, that's me.
Hi everyone, my name's Lewis. I'm a second year law student and I'm the current president of the 93% Club York.
Hi, my name's Caroline. I'm in my final year studying philosophy, which means that I graduate in 2 months. Big yikes. So I started the 93% Club back in 2019 and made my way up as Chief of Staff for the foundation. So that's me.
Hi, I'm Christine. I'm an adult nursing student. I'm in my 3rd year. And I'm kind of a bit sick, so if I sound like a 14-year-old going through puberty, that's why, yeah.
Hi, I'm Monica. I'm a second-year molecular cell biology student, and I was in the panel last time, so I'm very glad to be here again.
Hi, my name is Dayan. I'm a second-year economics student, and I'm also the president of the Economic Society.
I'm Abby. I was on the first panel, PhD student, education.
Hi, my name is Mwenda, and I'm a second-year genetics student.
Woo. Yeah, give them an applause. Okay, so we've just met our lovely second panel. We're going to start off very swiftly with our first question, which is already on the board. So audience, I'm just going to remind you, if you could all take part, get on the Mentimeter, do all that good stuff. Re-log in if you need to. So the first question, is the proposed removal of student finance for kids who fail maths or English GCSE fair and appropriate?
Well, as the majority of people are saying, I think that completely ludicrous. So whoever said agree, I'd actually genuinely be intrigued to know the reasoning behind it. I'm not saying it's the wrong idea, but I'd be intrigued to know why. Because this kind of touches on the first question, which is that there's a lot of basically the difference between public school and private school alone would be having a great it'd have a major effect on basically who's going to be getting these A's and who's going to be passing. I know basically from my own experience, it was something I was thinking of adding for the first question, but it's that there's a lot of teachers that I've come across that don't seem to care about the students. So whether, maybe it's because it's state school and they're not getting paid so much, but they don't care about the students. So when it comes to now a student that happens to misbehave a bit in year 8, he's now got the reputation forever of being that kid. So when he needs support, he's not really getting it. The teachers are quick to brush him off. If he now goes on to fail and he wants to go to uni, he now has no support from the government purely because of a teacher that he broke up on the wrong side of the bed. So yeah, I don't agree with this at all. I think a lot of students who want to go into uni, they need that student finance, they need that financial support, and unfortunately they don't get the support from schools. So if there's no one else to turn to, then what can they do? Otherwise, not get an education, which then goes into that same loophole anyway. Yeah.
I think that, I don't know whose idea this is, but it feels racist. You know, and you can't say something's racist, but it's giving racism. Because, I don't know, who is this going to affect more? Like you said, it's going to affect the people who are coming from the low socioeconomic status, so, which are predominantly, people who are looking like me, or, who are brown, or, Asians and stuff. So to me, this feels like someone's trying to wipe out a certain demographic from uni. That's just the way I see it. Yeah.
So this is nothing new, right? I think that this plan is perfectly fine. It's nothing new. Let's break it down, right? here at the University of York, for most degrees, you need a grade 4 in English and maths for entry. This is the same for most universities. At UCL, it's a grade 5. If you don't get this, you won't be able to come to into university. So the plan is nothing new. What you said about it being racist, that's not true. The demographic that perform the lowest and the worst in the UK are white working class boys. They do the worst. And in fact, the ones that get the lowest grades are actually Irish travellers. I actually had a look at the attainment 8 scores the other day, and Irish travellers have an attainment 8 score of 22. That means on average they get a grade 2. Most don't even finish their GCSEs. Asians, Chinese students have a score of around 69, which means that on average they get majority grade 6s and 7s. People from Indian backgrounds have around 60. People from black African backgrounds have actually outperformed the white working class boys, and they actually outperform white people in general, with around a score of I think it was 54, 55. So it's pretty, I don't agree that it's racist, because actually ethnic minority people, they do quite well in their GCSEs. And look, we also need to be realistic about higher education. The UK has a bit of a broken higher education system and lags behind many in Europe. For example, Germany. Germany has a tiered education system. We can go into vocational education or academic education. The fact of the matter is that academic education is not for everyone. It's very difficult, and if you struggle to get a grade 5 or 4 at GCSEs in English, maths, and GCSE maths and English, you shouldn't go to university to study an academic degree. It's not going to help you. There are other routes for you to go down, such as apprenticeships.
Is that all right?
Okay, wait. I can feel the hubbub. No. Everyone calm down. I'm going to break down a few things you said. Everyone, be quiet. Shh. We've not got that much time. We're going to break down a few things you said so that it's a bit easier to kind of navigate, and I'll think of like what I took from it. But from the first point, I could see everyone's reactions, and very level-headed, very neutral. There's some truth to what Diane said. So when you think about it, statistically, the UK is 97% white. So using a bit of logic, the people who are going to score the lowest are going to be that where 97% of the population are of that skin colour. So statistically, using some GCSE maths knowledge, that is correct, that's going to be correct. In the same way, he also said, for example, I study medicine. The entry requirement for me is you can't study medicine in the UK. In most medical schools, apart from, I think, 2, you can't study unless you have at least a 6 in English and your maths, sciences, whatever, GCSEs. So once again, there's some truth in that point. But I think where there's going to be some disagreement with what you're saying is your last point is one thing that I can remember the most strongly, is where you said that these people shouldn't be coming to university to study an academic degree. But I think what you're forgetting is that university isn't just academic degrees. If you go to university or if you want to pursue higher education, there are some degrees which don't need this traditional sense of academia. Traditional sense, I put that in quotation marks. Because there are some degrees which you can go and it requires more of a portfolio per se, or it requires you demonstrating interest in that subject as opposed to you having a written knowledge, because it's also a debate whether us having these linear exams is a true test of knowledge or it's actually a test of whether you can cram the night before and vomit words on a page and get a 9, which I did for my exams, I'm not going to lie. But yeah, so there was a lot of hands up, a lot of incorporation wanted to, of course, get started.
First of all, I hear what you're saying. I agree with a lot of, you've highlighted, the points that I can agree with. You was talking about being realistic. Realistically speaking, the grades you got on one day, they don't define your whole academic history. if I was defined by my grades in GCSE, like, it's not fair to, someone has had one bad day and that grade is stuck with them. So you can't say, oh, you got a 2, you shouldn't be in uni because the mum could have died that day. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, that's an extreme example, but yeah, just that's where I'm coming from in that.
Can I fully understand that, but it's not just one day, right? You need to.
Obviously, you don't. I'll come to you. I'll be there.
The current system is that you need to keep retaking English and maths until you pass it. So, you have the opportunity in year 11, sometimes even year 10. If you don't pass it then, year 12, then again year 13. Some people stay for an additional year, maybe year 14.
Yeah.
So there are more chances. But as I said, I find that the UK education system in general is not up to par. At present, I fully agree that some universities, you go and you study art or something which requires a portfolio or even vocational degrees, but that's not how the UK university higher education system is structured. I said that there are countries that do this really well, such as Germany, that has that tiered education system, but that's not the UK.
Do you guys want? I know you guys had your hand up, yeah?
Just check. Okay.
Yeah.
This one. So when I first looked at that statement, I sort of found it quite alarming that somebody who failed English and maths isn't allowed to go to university because they won't be able to get financial support. And I know I can only speak from my own perspective, but I come from a very small family. It's literally just me, my mum and my dad. And my mum and my dad both came from Thailand, and I grew up where English was not my first language. And if anything, when I was actually the only Asian person in my school when I was growing up in County Durham, and I actually failed every single mock exam to do with the English language because I didn't know Shakespeare and I didn't know Othello and what was poetry and what was prose. So when I was growing up, I always had the ambition of becoming a lawyer, and I needed to go to university. And so I think there's two folds to it. I think, if you're wanting to go to university and you failed because of certain obstacles that has been put in your way, it's not actually your fault. I think we need to look at it a bit more clearly and say, if you are somebody that are struggling to succeed in your maths and your English exam, and you do want to go to university, if you fail, there should be some more support for it. It shouldn't need to be completely wiped out. I think that's wrong because you're just taking an opportunity away from somebody, an ambition of somebody away. And I mean, I completely understand your point, Diane. But at the same time, if you are failed, that shouldn't mean that the opportunity's been taken away. I failed English, but at the end of the day, when I did my GCSE exam, I ended up getting an A in it, and I'm sitting right here at University of York studying philosophy. And I've got maximum student finance as well, both for maintenance and everything. So I'm still here.
I agree with what you said as well. I think that it's really important to consider the fact that you can't just tell students that they can't do something because of a monetary thing. You can't take that thing away from them. They have experienced so many barriers already, so many challenges, and for them to have to hear that instantly and be like, okay, so if you don't get this grade within this time period, you're out, education isn't for you. I think the focus is too negative there. You've got to reinforce, I think, personally, in a positive way. So looking at things that they can do, how can we get them there instead of saying, okay, you can't do this period. It's really limiting. And especially as someone that is working class and comes from a family where my parents are immigrants, they face so many challenges for me to be here right now. And if that was something for them, and I was struggling at this point as well with GCSEs, if I was told that, I probably wouldn't be here either. It would just discourage me further. And I think it just needs to be said that it's so important to just look at it in a positive light rather than focusing on it as in, okay, you're not allowed it because you just haven't gotten there, because some people just struggle, and it's okay. Some people have like bad periods in their life. They need to be supported. They can't just be like thrown away. We're not objects, we're human. And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I completely agree with what you said. But one thing that you said that really struck with me is you said the British education system is just not wired that way. So someone that does an art degree should be getting this grade in English and maths. But aren't you saying in that the British education system is not correct? So it shouldn't be like that. Because if it was created in a way that provided equal opportunities, you wouldn't need to do well in maths to do art, because some people are more artistic, and so they don't need any kind of 6, 5, 4 in maths in order to present a beautiful portfolio and then go on to be an art exhibition person, you know? And I just felt like when you said that, you said, oh, well, it's just not structured that way. But I feel like that's a very limiting way of just saying, well, this is the way it is, so we should just go along with it.
I think another way that it's quite limiting is the fact that it kind of assumes that people who do vocational degrees aren't academically smart. So, for example, bringing it back to myself again, I do medicine, which is probably one of the most highly looked on degrees. Someone, quote unquote, you see a medical student, you'd hope they're smart because we're meant to save your lives in like 3 years' time. But for my GCSEs, I did art, I got a 9. I've done art exhibitions, that's still something I pursue. So if we're talking with this narrative of, oh, you failed your GCSEs, okay, you're just going to go do a vocational course. If I didn't do medicine, or in the future, I still want to have an art studio, that's still something I want to do. I'm in the process of doing another exhibition for my artwork. So, and like on paper, I have a good set of GCSEs, I've got a good set of A-levels, I'm in medical school. So on paper, I am this academic person, yet I'm still pursuing vocational traits. So I think that's also something that needs to be considered. What do you want to say? Yeah.
I just wanted to say as well, I feel like we've kind of moved away from the actual question at hand. The questions, we've kind of gone on to saying like people are allowed or not allowed, but the question's saying if you fail, you don't get student finance. So it's not saying you're not allowed, it just means you have to pay. And it goes back to now this equal access thing. It's like, okay, so if you're really wealthy, I can just fail 100 times, my parents will sort me out, now I've got a good degree, now I can get the job I need to. On the flip side, a guy that's worked stupidly hard, unfortunately, again, his mum might have died, unfortunately, whatever, he's now lost that forever. But then this guy who's very wealthy, props to him and his family, but now he's getting everything that everyone else that might deserve it more than him, that he's getting it instead, and I think that's pretty unfair.
I think that enforces the idea that we've talked about in previous panels, and also something we've kind of talked about in general, of the idea that if you have money, you can kind of get around the rules. So this rule is saying that you're not going to get student finance, so therefore you can't finance going to university. You could also sub-write that as you fail, no uni, but if you're rich, you can still do that. So you can go underneath that rule. So I think, as you said, it is also highlighting this disparity. And as someone on the board said, if you can find it in the word puzzle, it's widening that gap, even though we should be acting to close the gap. That's the whole point. And there's a question in the audience which I'm trying to get to. Oh,
Could I just respond to some?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you asked me if I thought that the UK education system is broken. Yes, I do. I made that clear. I do not think that the UK education system at the moment provides everyone with opportunities that might benefit them. And also, it was also said that, do I think that people who do vocational degrees are not academically smart? No, but some people, what they want to do is something, they don't need to go to university to do that. For example, you can become an accountant without going to university. You can go do an apprenticeship. You can become an engineer without going to university through apprenticeship courses. The UK is slowly changing to allow for more, wider options and opportunities available to you, where a company will pay for you to be at university. Yes, that's true, but we still have a long way to go. But something that I think is important to recognize is that being rich will not mean that you can get around this rule. Being rich does not mean that you will go to a good university. a previous panel member made the point that people are aiming to go to the Russell University or top third universities such as Lancaster, St Andrews, etc. By being rich, you cannot buy access to these universities, because if you have a 2 or 1, or listen, if you do not have a maths or English GCSE, you will still not be able to gain access, because there are still requirements, GCSE requirements for these courses. In medicine, there are quite high requirements. But even for other degrees, you will still need a grade 4 in English, for example. So like I do economics. There is no GCSE maths requirement, but there is a GCSE English requirement, a requirement of a grade 4. If you do not meet this basic requirement, your application will not be considered. And this is the case at every university. Your GCSE, that's a basic requirement. So really, I think this is the question is a really moot point. It's not changing anything.
Okay, sorry to cut everyone. I know we've got like a million hands up, but we have got timing. I'm going to go to Matt.
So a lot of the question is a moot point. I still think you can, with money, get yourself into a university, a course which might not require an equivalent pass at GCSE English or maths. But regardless, the whole point of this as like a section in the government's response to Augur was, it's almost like a smokescreen. It's a government that has a hostile approach to higher education, and it's adding in bureaucracy for the sake of it. It's saying, okay, well, actually, we're going to take that choice away from you as a university. If you want students who don't have these grades to come to you, then actually you're going to have to find some other way to fund them, or they can self-fund. And it's taking that out of the hands of universities, while also being so-called hands-off and saying, actually, nah, we don't tell universities how to run themselves. Yet they fundamentally do.
Yeah, no.
Oh, yes. Go. Resits cost money. Tutors cost money, which is, again, something that people who would be in a higher socioeconomic background would have the opportunity to do, and therefore they would be able to pass the grades that you're saying. So if they did badly in maths or English the first time round, they would have the opportunity to resit it as many times as they can, have the opportunity to have tutors that are really good, that can teach them how to get around that and do better, and then they will be able to access those opportunities with the money that they have. But someone that doesn't have that money won't be able to resit it that many times, and so they will be stuck with the grades they have.
And I think to conclude, like, we've kind of touched on two things. I've got two last things to say, and then we'll move on to the next question, which is already on the board, so thank you everyone for taking part. But the first thing I want to say is that the previous question was talking about if you fail, you won't get student finance. In the question, comprehension skills, that means that if you can finance yourself without SFE England, or it sounds like England, I don't know I said that, but without SFE, then you still can go to university. So the question itself literally proves that you can get in if you're rich. And I have a testament to that because, as I've said a million times, I went to private school. So a lot of people in my school were very wealthy, to say the least. So there was a girl who wanted to study medicine, and unfortunately at GCSE she got a 5 in one of her Englishes, so she didn't get through to medical school in the first time round, and she reapplied and didn't get through again. So she now goes to a private university and she studies medicine. She pays a large sum of money to go to a private university, which I didn't know existed, and she can still study medicine because she didn't make the requirements. So that also, once again, shows that you can get there if you have enough money in the world. But we'll move on to the next question, which we have already talked about in All the Questions Go Together. So it is, do you think your class and intersection is a form of privilege? What do you think? The audience have answered. I'll give the panel a minute.
I kind of feel like that's I didn't vote on the poll because I feel like it's a really difficult question to answer, because I think it depends on the class and intersection that you're representing. So in some ways, my class and intersection is a form of privilege, but then in other ways it isn't. But maybe if I was a white, cis, middle-class man, my class and intersection would be a really much more obvious form of privilege than it is to me as like a woman of colour.
anyone on the panel got anything they'd like to add? Do we understand the question? I mean, I think you can think of the question in two ways. So it's asking, do you think whether class and intersectional of all that is a privilege? And then you can also talk about your personal story and whether you think your class is a privilege. So do we first of all understand what privilege is? Because that's something that, is quite forefront of this. It's not just thinking that, oh, you have so much money in the world and things like that. If we're thinking about everything of intersection, I was explaining to my friend what today's event was. I'm black, I'm a female, but there's also some things I face because I'm a black female. For example, microaggressions of me being aggressive, that's not necessarily tied to being black, that's not necessarily tied to being female, that's necessarily tied to being a black woman. So it's thinking about whether you think you hold privilege as what your intersection is, or whether you think there is privilege in specific intersections.
Well, I'll say, to be honest, in my opinion, especially being a black male, quite a lot of it speaks for itself, so I don't really need to speak too much into that. But what I will say is, I think more as a talking point is the class aspect of it, because you hear it a lot, especially between lower class and the middle class. A lot of the middle class always have an issue with the amount of opportunities lower class people get, because lower class people, you'll see that there's loads of schemes and after school clubs and bursaries and funding for them to gain access to any opportunity they have. Whereas on the flip side, the middle class, especially like the upper middle class, they are usually restricted of all these opportunities because firstly, in terms of tax brackets, they usually get taxed unfairly because they earn just above what they can get to actually sustain a living, but then because they're earning so much now, they're losing a lot. So they've lost that income. Then on top of that, they don't get any of these, what's it called, these hand-me-outs. So now when it comes to their children being in school, they're not getting these hand-me-outs, whereas the children that are of a lower class, they do. So I feel like in terms of a privilege, there's no privilege as such, but I think it's a talking point in the sense of a lot of middle-class people sometimes think these lower-class people are getting better opportunities simply because they're poorer, whereas someone in the middle class is just living the regular life, which has its benefits, of course. And I'm not saying I'm for and against, I'm just bringing this point up. Whereas middle-class people, they just live that regular life. Whereas the lower-class people may get, as I said, these bursaries, these schemes and all that such, so by the time they've finished their education, their CV's looking amazing, whereas the middle-class person's had to use their own networking and their parents might only be middle-class because they came from a poor background and they worked themselves up to being in this decent situation, but they still have their own issues that they need to go through, due to the fact that they weren't born into their own wealth. So I think it's just more of a talking point between middle class and lower class, really.
Yeah. What did you want to say?
I think to help me understand things like this, I like to make it a bit smaller. So what this means to me is if I can break it down, maybe secondary school level. So I'm going to talk about academic privilege. Even little things that people wouldn't maybe necessarily realize. So I was in year 7. Obviously, that's a really pivotal time. So I'm not a very shy person. I'm pretty outspoken, I'd say. But going to school, I'm from Stockton, but I schooled in Hartlepool, which is an even smaller, very white place. And I was the only black girl in 1,750 people. So that, and not only being the only black girl, but being a bigger girl as well. I've always been a bigger girl, and you can't go unseen. But I felt I found myself shrinking because I was oh God, Christine, you're a big girl. People bully people for being big. Oh, you're black as well. Oh, Christine, people. And I like to do things I like to do sports. I like to, I'm quite an artistic person. I liked engaging in art. I'm not that dumb. So I would put myself forward for things like that. But because I felt, I've got all these things working against me, and anytime I felt I tried to put myself out there, you'd have people, people aren't happy when, racist people aren't happy when you're trying to establish yourself or trying to stand out in the slightest way. So I'd literally hear so much racial slurs that would make me, continue to shrink myself. So I feel like there's some things that I didn't try and access because I was like, oh, I'm not ready for the turmoil that's going to come with this, you know? So I think, yeah, there's some intersections, how do I put it? Some people do have that privilege because they don't have to go into school thinking, what am I going to, I don't know, pretend I don't know the answer to. You know what I mean? They're just they don't have to be aware of stuff like that.
They can like fully engross themselves
Exactly,
in every situation.
yeah. Because sometimes I think back and I'm like, there's so much I could have done, or my friends did, but I was like, I didn't tell them, but I was like, no, I physically can't. Like, the abuse is going to be phenomenal. I can't handle it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that's my take on that question.
Yeah, as president. Would you have anything you'd like to add?
When it comes to class and intersectional, I think it's a very big, broad discussion, and obviously the lady in the audience touched on breaking it down even more so on kind of her experience, but also thinking it from kind of lower class, middle class, upper class. The kind of work that we do at the 93% Club York is kind of based around, levelling the playing field. And I use sometimes, and I place emphasis on the word because it's not always the case, like you pointed out. They may just earn over the tax bracket and struggle, and then there may be schemes. And that's why I say sometimes. But also you're in a position where for some people, they may not have connections or the exposure, or they may not be around people to have the confidence to engage in networking to get them placements. And this kind of inner conflict that they have to deal with sets them back significantly when they're on their journey to achieving their goals. And I think you earlier, sorry, I've forgotten your name from the first panel, pointed out nicely that for a lot of the time, in maybe working class families, you kind of go with the flow. You go to your local school, you go to your local secondary school, and you go to college, so forth. For me, no one in my family went to university, so that was that was the opposite of the norm. That was different from that presupposed path almost that I should have taken. And so I think when we think of is class privilege, well, if we consider it in the perspective which I am, then absolutely, because often what you'll find yourself is that your peers may have that ability to connect and discuss better with a lawyer, let's say, at a nice event, and because they can put themselves forward in a particular, well-spoken and confident manner, they connect onwards and they can expand their network much easily and quicker than, let's say, somebody that comes from a small village and hasn't really had those opportunities, and his parents, they didn't really come from the professional industry, so they didn't know all about the best schools in the area, or they couldn't help him with that really important mock exam for that maths exam. And I think that's all really important to consider when we think of this privilege, because actually, though in some cases, like you said, it's not, I think when we also look at it from the way I'm looking at it, it's also a major advantage and something which many working class people and many people who don't have access to those networks and opportunities not only have to deal with on an academic level, but also have an inner conflict, and it challenges their ability as to whether they're good enough in the first place. And
Can I
that,
just ask a quick question? How would you be defining privilege in that sense? Because obviously, there's different ways that you can view it depending on what kind of definition of privilege that you have. So how would you define it in this situation?
Well, I don't have a strict definition for privilege, and that's why I cautiously use the word sometimes to begin, because I gave allusion to the lady in the audience earlier who kind of had her take on it, and then we listened to the story about how you went through school and you found that really difficult. So I think from my take, it's kind of obviously we working class and people that are well off and have exposure to those networks, and how that's actually significantly beneficial. So not a strict definition, but I hope that provides you with some kind of understanding of where I was going.
Thank you very much for that. Tiff, I think you're going to say something or read something.
Yeah, the question. I'll do that now. Yeah. Right, this is our third and final question. We would love to have these conversations for longer, but we booked out the room for a certain time. So moving on, do you think focusing on race and class divides us? So the reason we chose this question is we want to go down the route of the phrase, I don't see colour. That's the route we're trying to go down. Do you think that that's the way we should be doing things, or should we be acknowledging that people are of different skin colours? Oh gosh, so we I'm running. I'll start here.
I think
a bit closer.
Oh, hello.
Yeah.
Hello. I think it very much depends on your race and your class for how much you see it. I've talked to some white boys who say it he was like, oh, I don't understand why people make race such a thing. And I think that's because for some people, it's not made to be a thing. I think for some people, they are made to be considered, quote unquote, what's the norm, while others are made to feel like the other. So for them, it's not a thing because they're made to feel like this is what's normal. To be different, that's somehow highlighted. And I think then you get you get some people being confused, like, wow, why are these people bringing it up so much? And it's because they feel it doesn't exist because it doesn't for them. They're sort of base zero. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. Completely agree. I think I'll throw it back to the panel if anyone wants to say anything.
I'm really in two minds about this because obviously, yes, look, there are, in the UK especially, there are very stark class differences. Someone from a middle class background will have a lot more social and financial capital than someone from a working class background. This is really important to recognize. Myself, for example, I'm very lucky in terms of the background and upbringing that I had. I mean, I have a mother who went to university, I have a grandmother who went to university, I have a great-grandfather who went to university. So I'm a fourth-generation university student. I have this certain privilege in that academia for me was always a given. But there are a lot of people here who are first-generation university students. These struggles that they've had and what they've gone through, personally, I don't, I might not fully understand or get, and that's important to recognize on my part, and it's important for other people like me to recognize, because when we're looking at the UK as a whole, it's important to be mindful of that, because everyone has different barriers they need to go through. So to ignore class is completely wrong, especially for the UK, because for me, I saw my mother go and get a master's degree. I went to her graduation, so I always looked up to her and to higher education. Someone that did not have that might really struggle. So that's why I think it's really it's important to be mindful of that. And I think it's important, and it's really good that the University of York, especially, you're putting big focus on social justice, have these access schemes to make sure that people from working class backgrounds, people who are first generation university students, that are able to access these schemes and go for it. So yeah, I think it's really important not to turn a blind eye towards it and to really acknowledge that, yes, these differences do exist, we need to address them, yeah.
I agree about the focus. I just wanted to say something about the way, and it's not you, I think we all talk about class, and I don't know how you feel about race in a particular way, and I'm really proud that I'm working class, and I think I've overcome barriers, but I've got great strength and great things from that. My mum is a fantastic woman, and I really look up to her, and she hasn't got a degree. The people who I work with will say that they like working with me because I'm honest and I say the things that nobody else will say, and that's partly because I'm working class. And, not that I want to stereotype, but I think, I don't want to be middle class. I don't want to fit into an organisation. I don't want to network in the way that people say that I should network. I want to be me, and I want to be accepted to be me, and I think that that's so important. So I do think it's a really important issue, but I don't think we should talk about it in a kind of deficit way. We should celebrate who we are.
I was just going to say something you said. I feel like the phrase, "I don't see color," comes from a very ignorant place, because you can't just decide to discredit Black people's experience or people of color's experience by saying, "Oh, I don't see it. You know, it doesn't exist to me." I feel like people that say that tend to be white or haven't had experiences that would have them have the ability to see the issues. And so when they say things like that, it feels very almost minimizing, because they're saying, well, I don't treat you different, so it's fine, right? As a person in my position, I treat you just the same as everyone else. I pretend I don't see the difference between you and someone else. And so that makes it okay. And so I don't see color, so everything's fine.
I'm just going to let everyone know we are going to run a little bit over, but we're going to try and keep it to about 4 more respondents.
I would disagree with that. I think that in daily life, ignoring race and color is the best way to live, because it just helps us be more open-minded and more, just, you know, live more in harmony with people. When you focus on race and class, I think even if you're trying not to be, you know, discriminatory, those unconscious biases just crop up in the back of your mind. But there are some cases where, you know, it is relevant, like in court cases where you're looking at like cases of racial hatred, like that is. That is important, where you have to look at, you know, race or class, like the race of the individuals, because then, you know, you can't ignore it then. But I think in daily life, I think we should try to be more colorblind and, you know, not focus on class, because I think then it does divide us.
Well, something I want to say, I don't know if I'm going to word it right, but I understand this point of not seeing color, but I actually agree with it. I don't think we should see color, but what I think we should be doing is appreciating the culture that comes with all these colors. So yes, okay, fine. We shouldn't ever stereotype people for, or not stereotype people, but abuse people and racially abuse people based off of just purely the color of their skin. But we should be appreciating, okay, they are Black, therefore I'm going to be appreciating the fact they have Afro hair. They might eat foods that are different. So when they're now in the workplace, you're actually appreciating it. And it's going back to the workplace question. It's an inclusive environment. I've had uncles tell me stories about he's going to like warm up his food in the workplace office, and all of them are like, "What is that smell? This is terrible." But it's like, this is just what he eats. And instead of flipping on the negative side, be like, that's different. What is that? Let me be a part of that. So we shouldn't see color, because color, all that does is divides us. But we should be appreciating all the cultures that come with these colors. Because also we all know races come in all different colors anyway. There's so many colors that come with being Black. There's so many colors that come with being Asian. There's so many colors that come with being white even. So and now there's many mixed race people, because a lot of people have stopped seeing color. So I think this color thing just needs to go away. But what we need to be focusing on is the cultural aspect of things in general.
Yeah. Okay. Do you wanna?
So about the question, do you think focusing on race and class divides us? So I put the answer agree, because fundamentally it does. But that's because historically we've always divided people by their race and their class. So first it started off by class, you know, you're rich or poor, people, you know, like back to ancient Egyptian times, you know, you were pharaohs or you were the workers. And then, you know, we've divided it more and more by skin color. You know, are you Black, are you white, are you brown? We've divided it like that. And so focusing on race and class does divide us, but that is because it always has. And I think moving forward as a society, we're all trying to, you know, be more inclusive and include everyone, and we should, and that's how it should be. But because it has always divided us, I think that it will continue to, because we have to focus on it, because we are all seen as separate, we have to continue to focus on it, because in certain spaces where there are predominantly white people, you need to make sure that you have more black, more Asians. Where there are spaces where there are more men, you need to include more women or other genders. I think that it's very important to acknowledge that, people are like, if you focus on it, then you're just making the issues bigger. But I don't think that's a fair assessment to make, simply because we've always been divided that way. And so you have to focus on it to bridge that gap. If you want change to happen, you have to enforce it in a way that it can become where it is an equal playing field, and we're quite far off. We're still making strides towards that, but we're quite far off it being, everyone is accepted or seen as the same.
Hi. I'm not sure I'm not answering your question, but I'm thinking about why can't we see what I'm seeing is another human being rather than whether the color or not. And I agree with that the student was saying, because we see another human being, but we respect our differences. And because the cultures, and I can't imagine we all same color, speak the same language, eat the same food, share. It's become a very boring world. I think we need to celebrate the differences, but at the same time respect that this is another human being in front of us. We don't have to, I don't know, I'm not sure whether it's colorblind or not, but personally, to me, it's about another human being that in front of me, but we are respecting our differences and share and celebrate our differences. And the world become much more beautiful and much more exciting. Because otherwise it's such a boring if we all speak one language, same color, eat the same food. I think I thought diversities are beautiful. Yeah. And we need to be more patient and respectful of one another.
I totally agree. I always kind of say, we can give a round of applause. I always kind of say there's uniqueness in our differences. So what we're going to do, we're going to go one here, one here, one here, and then it's a wrap, and then we have something else we need to announce. But there'll be feedback on the screen, so as you're listening, feel free to just, comment on the event. And I know we don't like feedback forms, but as a student,
Please.
Do you know what I mean? Do it for the student, you know what I mean? Thank you.
I can't swallow the idea of not seeing color. I can't swallow the idea of not seeing ethnicity, of not seeing queerness of people, because that's what people are. That's part of them. So you can't just ignore a major part of what people are and say that, I don't see that. It's just like saying, I don't see you, because I am a queer Latin person. If you say you don't see queer in me, if you say you don't see Latin in me, you're not seeing a major part of my history, a major part of constitutes what I am today. So I really think we should get over this idea of not seeing color. We should see color. We should see color and celebrate, and don't mind the color, but embrace everything. Because when I'm talking with my black friends, I know that they must have some history that is different from my white friends. There are some things that black folks go through that we cannot ignore. We cannot ignore racism. We cannot ignore that if you are with a black person in a store, they may be followed by a security guard. And then if you don't see that, you're ignoring the history, the reality of that person. So we cannot ignore the struggles and, as my friend was saying there, the culture of other people, because they may be different from yours. And it's a very privileged way to say, I don't see color, because you put yourself in a position of denying the racism that exists. You put yourself in the position to deny power of the blackness, because if black people for the last 40 years are gaining power through their blackness, how can you say that you don't see the black in them? So I really think we should go over this idea, and we should embrace people's identities. That's it.
Amen.
No, I completely agree with everything that was said. Every day, I'm viewed through a racialized lens. I am brown to everyone who sees me. So by you telling me I don't see colour, you don't see me. I love being brown. I love everything about being brown. And if you're not seeing me as being brown, then I don't want you to look at me at all. And saying I don't see colour and it divides us, that's your problem. If you feel divided because I am so proud of being brown. If I bring up being brown all the time, then that's your problem. That's something you need to deal with. And that's not for me to explain to you. That's not for anyone to explain to you. There's so many people out there who's put out, like, if you're looking at it from an academic lens, there's so many, like, academics of colour who have come out and said so many things and can educate you. So if you feel discomfort of race being brought up, especially as white people, then that is your problem at the end of the day. I, at the end of the day, the week, the year, will still be a brown queer individual. And if you're not willing to see that because you don't want to feel the difference between us, then that's, again, your issue. Because we are different, and I will forever stand proud in that difference, that we are apart. And if you have a problem with it, then that is your problem, and that's not something for me to deal with.
Amen. I think everyone summed everything up that I was going to say, basically. It's an experience. Like, the fact that you have the right to say that you don't see someone's colour just shows that you don't want to see someone's colour. You don't want to. And the reason that it is said by a lot of white people is that they don't want to think about the fact that there was slavery. There was slavery, and we still, and our children, are going to deal with the trauma of slavery basically forever. And we're only being taught a small portion of it. We're only being taught the white lens through slavery. So I think that saying that, oh, I didn't see colour, I didn't see this, is just erasing what we have been through and what we've come to now. So, yeah.
Okay, hello, is this working, bro? Okay, we're going to end the panel there. I'm going to say a few things. I think that last question was a quite nice one to end on. We got a lot of incorporation from the audience. I'll say my view, not as my view as the end view. But I think that there's a danger with saying you don't see colour, because never mind the actual statement, I think the sentiment behind it, yes, I agree that the fact that you're saying you don't see colour, everyone's one race, everyone's human, it's beautiful. Like, that is beautiful. But at the same time, if you don't see colour, you can't see the disparity between people of different skin colours. That's why there's this issue with that statement, because if you don't see colour, then you can't see the problem. So I think that's what's more encompassed when we say we don't like that statement and things like that. And I thought it was really beautiful, like everyone talking about their issues. Like, Jill got a bit emotional. Like, I can, same. I cry too much. I completely agree. Like, it's so beautiful to kind of think about the struggles that you have. Me being my intersectionality, being a black female, I came from a very poor background. I always think, and I always talk about with Phoebe, for example, would I ever wake up and want to be someone from a more privileged background? Would I ever want to wake up as a white man? Sometimes I was joking, being like, yeah, I kind of want a bit, I want to avoid a few things. But at the end of the day, I don't. I am so happy that I grew up without a lot of money. I'm so happy that I grew up as a black female, because that made me who I am today. And as people have said, if you can't see my colour, if you can't see those things about me, then you don't truly know me. And I think that's the thing that makes people individual.
No, that's not a beautiful statement to end on. I just want to say thank you to all the panellists. You guys can take your seats now. Nick, I believe you have something to say?
Yeah. Oh, can you hear me? I've got like the graveyard shift, the rubbish job. But there should be a QR code soon to be... Ooh, there you go. So I just wanted to do a plug for the student expert panel. So I work with Phoebe and support university colleagues with a student expert panel. And our recruitment is open now, like X Factor thingy stuff. So you can go on that website, click the QR code if you want to join the student expert panel and be part of Middle Ground 3.0, organising, sitting on the panel, deciding on the statements. Not sure Phoebe and Tiffany want to be, I don't know.
No, we're just laughing at ourselves. It's a joke. No, but as you said, like, the student expert panel is such a good way to just share on what goes on at the university. Give you a brief example, little insights. So, for example, with things like examinations, we get to have a say of like how maybe exams should go moving forward. Things like a student hub, things like, okay, for example, with bursaries and scholarships, is the application process fair to all? Is it accessible? There are so many things that go on in York that, I'll be honest, that I didn't know were going on until I got this job. And I was like, oh, wow, York actually does a lot, but it's about making sure that students can see this. So, also, I'm not gonna lie, they pay very well. So, yeah, you get to like do things like this, and we have the creative freedom to do whatever you want.
There's free food every
and there is
week
free
as well.
food, cake, tea, all that kind of stuff.
And you can be involved in Middle Ground Part 3.
Yeah, what she said. Don't know when that's gonna happen, but yeah. So thank you very much for coming. Like I said, feel free to grab some food. Oh, I think you have something to say. Oh, that's me out. Thank you very much.
Say bye.
Just before I say a few thank yous on behalf of Michelle, who can't be here today because unfortunately she's got COVID and she's absolutely devastated, and she's been texting on the hour, every hour, saying, I want to be here, but I'm listening in. But I just want to say a few words and then a few votes of thanks. I was really struck by the curiosity in the room. I was struck by the passion in the room. I was struck by the emotions in the room. And I kind of leave feeling, if you are the leaders of tomorrow, then surely we are in safe hands. Because if you are asking those big, bold questions, if you are beginning to kind of debate what the future could and should look like, and not allow the past to be the determinant of what the future should be, then actually I leave with a real sense of optimism. And not optimism because I think race doesn't matter, or we don't see colour, or we don't see difference. I'm as proud as my colleagues to have come from a working class background. And just for the record, I didn't get my maths, and I'm a pro vice chancellor. And I can remember the maths teacher said if she did less smiling and just concentrated a bit more, because many years later I learned I was dyslexic. But dyslexic wasn't a word, that, you know, I was just lazy, which was a load of nonsense. And so what you leave me with is a real sense of hope. And often when I move away from debates like this, I just think, same old, been here, done it, and got the T-shirt. I'm not leaving feeling like that. I just think what an inspirational set of people who give up their evening to listen, to engage, but they're not scared of challenging. And I loved it when you didn't agree with something. You know, you could just feel the heat of the room. Phoebe, I loved it. You know, I'm going to try that in my classes. You know, it never works when you go like that and you want people... But why should you be quiet? So if you are our leaders of tomorrow, which I mean no doubt you are, then I hope you will step up. Because if you don't step up, then actually we have very little hope. And change only comes when we work together. Not when we're divided, not when we simply celebrate. Celebrating difference is not enough. We've been celebrating difference for a lifetime, you know, and we've been celebrating difference in my lifetime. Actually, what we have to do is work with those differences, acknowledge those differences, but actually it's inherent in our culture. And I'm going to finish on the note that my wonderful colleague said, because it brought me to tears, which is, I just want to be me. I want to get that job because I'm the most talented in the room. I want to get that degree because I worked flipping hard to kind of get it. But I deserve, and every one of us deserves a supporter, and every one of us deserves somebody that is just on our side when it matters most. So it doesn't matter to what heights we get. We don't change who we are. And as you can see, I don't even dress like a pro vice chancellor, but I am working at it. So colleagues, can I just say a huge thank you on behalf of Michelle, because if Michelle was here, she would just be so proud of each and every one of you. A huge thank you to the panellists for an exciting, you know, and really vibrant debate. To you as the audience, because it's not what the panel say, it's what you as an audience do to engage. But events like this don't just happen. They take thoughtfulness, they take planning, and they take thinking. And so it's about time that Phoebe just stood up and we actually acknowledged somebody who's worked so hard. Who just stays really silent and quiet in the background. And that's real leadership. when your presence is felt all the way through the room, but you actually don't know how much is what, and on top of, you know, doing her degree. So thank you, Phoebe. But alongside that, there are colleagues behind the scenes from the university that I really do also want to kind of acknowledge. Jess, where are you? Jess and Gary. And then finally, I just love this, and this is Michelle saying that Nick Glover is her partner in crime. And she was just saying a huge thank you, because in Michelle's absence, these wonderful colleagues just picked up the reins to make sure that all the things that needed to be done today and worked tirelessly behind the scenes. So a huge thank you, everybody. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for making a difference.